The Road to Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh's War and Peace, read and published by Mr. Books. History is rarely the neat arrangement of dates and decrees that textbooks would have us believe. Instead, it is a river, wide and swollen with the multitudes who have lived and died along its banks, colored both by the passionate hero and the voiceless peasant. Nowhere is this truer than on the road to Hanoi, a road haunted by names whispered in the darkness, by the measured footsteps of a man who shaped the fate of a nation. Ho Chi Minh got to walk the road to Hanoi is to trace the fractures and hopes of Vietnam's heart. It is to breathe in the mists rising off the Red River, to hear the distant echoes of revolution and love, of families torn asunder by war and pieced together by a yearning for peace. This book is not simply a history. It is a pilgrimage through the tumult of ambition, sacrifice, pain, and reconciliation. At its center stands Ho Chi Minh, more myth than man to some, more mentor than monster to others, always the indomitable face of a people's struggle. When Ho Chi Minh first left the village of Kim Lian, no one could have foreseen the ultimate destination to which his footsteps would lead, the gates of Hanoi, battered yet unbroken, a flag's lone star rising above a city etched with scars, and a voice, aged and frail, promising peace. But what is peace when won at so high a cost, when the faces of lost generations linger in every alleyway, when victory tastes so much like grief? This is not merely a war story. It is a journey into the soul of Vietnam. It recounts the feverish dreams of a young Ho Chi Minh, his odyssey across continents in search of an answer, the fires of resistance stoked against colonial oppressors, and the bitter romance of brother against brother in the great tragedy that split his homeland. Yet it is also the story of reconciliation, the slow, arduous climb toward understanding, and the quiet power that forgiveness wields in the aftermath of chaos. As we walk this road, we will meet soldiers and mothers, poets and leaders, all tethered to the fate of one extraordinary man. Their voices, layered over decades of conflict, form the backbone of Vietnam's journey from ruination to dawn. Through them, we confront uncomfortable truths and fragile hopes. Through them, we witness the profound grace that emerges only when peace is carved from the hardest stone. Settle in. The road to Hanoi winds long, and its lessons are deeper than they first appear. This is Ho Chi Minh's War and Peace, and it may change the way you see not just Vietnam, but history itself. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button to support the channel, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an audiobook that could change your life. Now, let's begin. Enjoy. Chapter 1. Prologue, The Whisper of the Red River. At dusk, the Red River glows beneath the sky, blushing with the memory of the sun. In the humid haze, cyclo-drivers call to each other, and children chase after clouds of dragonflies along its muddy banks. Hanoi breathes its age and sighs and shudders, every stone along the old quarter's fringes humming with secrets. But listen quietly. When the city's restless pulse slows and night settles, you can still hear the whispers carried on the wind. They are flutters of history, stories that once trembled in the heart of a young boy born into a humble village far from the metropolis's edge. Ho Chi Minh, a name unremarkable to those not yet attuned to the movements of fate, stood on the mice banks of a tributary, watching the world drift past him. The year was 1890, and Vietnam was caught within the indifferent grasp of colonial masters. The spectral outline of French authority crept through every marketplace and rice paddy. Their language and customs warped the native rhythm of blood and earth. For young Nguyen, each sunrise was a lesson in quiet resistance, every family meal an act of subtle defiance, every lullaby a soft promise of freedom. But the Red River remembers. It recalls the nights when Nguyen's father, a poor but educated Mandarin, spoke of the ancient glories of Dai Viet, before the yoke of domination. And the mornings when his mother wept quietly over her thinning rice bowl, pride hiding in the corners of tired eyes. The village of Kim Leon was a world away from the crowded, arguing avenues of Hanoi, but the same strife that simmered in the capital rippled through its mud lanes and thatched roofs. From here, the first stones were set on the road to Hanoi, not just a geographical journey, but a passage of spirit. The boy who would become Ho Chi Minh carried the river in his heart, its patient persistence, its willingness to cut through stone and soil alike. In these early moments, something essential was forged, a resolve that, no matter how fierce the current, he would find the strength to cross to the far shore, the world beyond. Kim Leon beckoned with its dangers and its wonders. Nguyen's dreams swelled with stories of emperors and renegades, of scholars and rebels. Yet, it was not grandeur that pulled him forward, but necessity, a gnawing urgency to know why his people's voices had been reduced to murmurs, why the laughter of his youth was often muffled beneath the boot of a stranger as years unfurled. War and peace would become twin strands woven into his journey. The Red River's whisper would follow him to Hanoi, then far beyond to Beijing's bustle, to Paris's ripe discontent, to the conference rooms where the fates of millions would be debated and decided. But it began here, with a boy on a riverbank, listening to a current that bore witness to pain and hope alike, not to understand Hanoi's destiny, to grasp the meaning of the struggle that would coat its streets in grief and glory. One must first return to the river, for it is there, among the reeds murmuring in the dusk, that the story of Ho Chi Minh's war and peace takes root, a whisper that grows into a roar no tyranny can silence. Chapter 2. Roots. The making of Ho Chi Minh. There are origin stories that thunder with prophecy, and others that unfold quietly in the hush of midnight kitchens and the flicker of oil lamps. The story of Ho Chi Minh is the latter, a narrative stitched from hunger, love, and the aching need to belong. Kim Leon was no place of privilege. The village lay wrapped in the tangled vines of northern Vietnam, its fields stubbornly clinging to life between monsoon and drought. Kung's family, with its threadbare prestige, possessed less silver than stories, but what they lacked in wealth, they made up for in inherited resilience. His father, Nguyen Sin Sais, was a confounding figure, a Mandarin who scorned the arrogance of power, a scholar whose contempt for corruption could have cost his life. Through those long, humid afternoons, Sais would quiz his son on Confucian texts, probing for the subtle wisdom that underpinned both defiance and humility. From his father, Kung inherited both the uprightness of centuries-old tradition and the growing awareness that tradition alone could not ransom a people set adrift by colonial domination. France's rule was salt in the village's wounds, a foreign tongue echoing through native temples, new taxes pressing tighter with every harvest. Yet, within the family's modest compound, ancient lessons were preserved, the importance of honor, of perseverance, of compassion. They would become the foundation stones for a boy who would one day move the hearts, not just of his people, but of the world. His mother, Hong Thao Lon, was the warmth that softened the sharpness of his father's lectures. She moved with quiet grace, tending the garden and the children with a smile that somehow withstood even the most crushing of seasons. Her hands knew the language of sacrifice, a silent willingness to surrender her comfort for the frail hope of her children's future. On restless nights, Kong would listen to the rustling bamboo, imagining her gentle voice weaving a tale of distant heroes and impossible reunions. Poverty was a constant companion, but it did not define the boy's spirit. Instead, it fueled his questions and honed his sense of justice. Why must some starve while others feast? Why was the dignity of his neighbors bartered for a foreign presence that could never understand the land's sacred pulse? These were not childish musings, but the urgent explorations of a mind, straining against the boundaries of its world. Education, for Kong, was not an end in itself, but a means to elevate others. His eyes widened by each lesson, even as he grew restless within walls too narrow for his longing. Yet he felt keenly the ache of divided loyalties, not just between old ways and new, but between a love for home and a drive to seek change elsewhere. The seeds of departure, the ones that would eventually carry him out of Kim Lian, where, sown with every tale of injustice, every glimpse of his mother's weary smile, there were moments when the river and the jungle seemed to conspire, breathing into him a restless courage. The first hints of resistance flickered in conversations on market days, in the whispered rumors of rebellion reaching even the smallest hamlet. Kong's world was expanding, the boundaries of village and kinship yielding to the desire to reclaim what Vietnam had lost: sovereignty, dignity, the soul of its people. Yet the deepest root was love, not just for homeland, but for humanity itself. As years passed, Kong translated private compassion into public resolve. The journey that began in a poor farming village would soon stretch farther than even he could have envisioned. Like the Red River, it would encounter obstacles, split and resume. But always it would press on, carrying with it the hopes and sorrows of a people desperate for deliverance. In the hush of those early years, the making of Ho Chi Minh reveals itself not in grand gestures, but in the constancy of hope, the irreplaceable value of each small act of courage. From blood, soil, and sacrifice, the beginning of a life was shaped, soon to leave its mark on history itself. Chapter 3. The Dream of Independence. Dreams do not always announce themselves with trumpets. Sometimes they slip quietly into the mind, like a shadow at midday, a presence felt before it is named. For Ho Chi Minh, later to be known as Ho Chi Minh, the dream of independence arrived. Gradually, a slow igniting fire kindled by stories, injustices, and the silent suffering of his people. By adolescence, Kong was outgrowing his homeland's narrow lanes and wary traditions. He watched as the might of France weighed upon every aspect of life in Annam and Tonkin names the colonizers used, confident in the notion that to rename was to possess. From the opium dens to the market squares, suppression lurked like a fever. Kong was attuned to each humiliation: a peasant's bowed head, a child's accent mocked in French-taught schools, a brutal tax on salt or rice. These insults accumulated within him, layers of pain and anger compressed into a longing for something lost. There came, too, knowledge from outside, smuggled pamphlets from early nationalists, stories of revolutions in distant lands, the slow trickle of ideas that perhaps the world was larger than the grip of an empire. Kong's world, once defined by the rhythms of rice planting and harvest, now pulsed with new possibility. He read about the American and French revolutions and the writings of Chinese reformers, and wondered, could Vietnam, too, cast off its shackles? But the dream of freedom, as he conceived it, went beyond the abstract. In market stalls and village squares, he began to speak quietly with those equally weary of colonial rule. Together, they questioned, plotted, and dared to hope. The dream grew bolder in the face of repression and want. Young Kong, eager and serious, sometimes reckless, was already becoming the compass for those around him, able to express what their hearts felt, but could not yet speak aloud. His decision to leave Vietnam, disguised as a kitchen helper on a French steamer, was not a flight, but a pilgrimage. His journey would take him to foreign docks and unfamiliar tongues, to years of deprivation in London, to political awakening in Paris and Moscow. He swept floors, starved, shivered, but absorbed everything: the pains, the lessons, the solidarities. At each station, the dream of independence grew clearer. Vietnam's cause in his mind became inseparable from the global push against exploitation and imperialism. Yet, the journey was also solitary. As years passed, friends fell away or were lost to prison or death, and letters from home carried news of persecution and sorrow. At times, the ache of exile seemed greater than any political ambition. And always, on the coldest nights, the memory of Kim Leon, its warm lights, his mother's voice, the enduring dignity of villagers called him back, a reminder of why. The struggle must go on, not independence, he came to realize, was not just a matter of armies and proclamations. It was the right of every child to sleep without fear, of every farmer to reap the fruit of his labor, of every family to remember the dead and celebrate the newborn in peace. Rooted in both tradition and revolution, this vision became the blueprint for his life's work. The dream did not fade with hardship. If anything, it sharpened, clarified by loss and the long learning of exile. As Nguyen Quoc is chosen, revolutionary name, he spoke for all the have-nots suffering under foreign bondage, connecting Vietnam's longing to global tides. Independence was now more than a national aspiration. It was a human right. This was the foundation he would carry home when, after decades abroad, he could at last return, hidden by the crowd's anonymity, his heart still beating to the humble. Rhythms of Kim Leon transformed now into the relentless resolve of Ho Chi Minh. Chapter 4. Forging Fire. War against the colonial past. Freedom is never simply granted. It is forged somewhere between pain and hope, in the crucibles of resistance and loss. When Ho Chi Minh, no longer merely Ho Chi Minh or even Nguyen Quoc, returned to Vietnam, the country was a battlefield of memories and possibilities. The colonial grip had tightened, but the spirit of the people pulsed beneath the surface, as fierce and unyielding as ever. The initial days of the resistance, the founding of the Viet Minh, were marked by a paradoxical mixture of fear and elation. Villages, still recovering from famines and raids, hid meetings in bamboo forests and candlelit huts. Whispered passwords and coded signals replaced songs and laughter. Ho Chi Minh moved between them like a shadow, blending compassion with strategy, humility with a kind of fiery inevitability. He was everywhere and nowhere, a living emblem for millions whose dreams of independence could now find a voice. Appeals were never only to arms, but to hearts. With every rousing speech, he reminded his people that the revolution's power grew not from vengeance, but from love for Vietnam, for the living and the dead, for history itself. The war was not just about ousting the French, but about reclaiming dignity stolen by decades of foreign rule. The years unfolded brutally. Battles in the northern highlands and the rice fields of the Mekong claimed thousands unmarked graves, multiplying behind every victory or defeat. The colonial machine responded with executions, villages reduced to ashes, and families torn apart. But the movement grew, rooted now in the peasantry, swelling with anger and hope. Women and children became messengers, spies, and sometimes soldiers, their hands as determined as their hearts. Throughout, Ho Chi Minh remained both present and spectral, a guiding spirit, seldom seen directly, but always felt. He handwrote manifestos, in cramped rooms, comforted grieving mothers, listened patiently to the criticism of comrades, suffered privations alongside his men. His own body paid the price. Years of jungle living etched lines across his face, wore patches through his clothes, but never dimmed the quicksilver in his eyes. The Allies' defeat of Japan in 1945 gave Vietnam a brief window, and Ho was ready. The August Revolution tilted history on its axis, crowds in Hanoi and Hue claiming the streets. The old flag torn down, the five-pointed star hoisted above a trembling capital. For a breathless moment, it seemed as though the long nightmare was over. Ho Chi Minh addressed the crowd in Hanoi's Ba Dinh Square, his words resounding for all who had loved and lost. All men are created equal. The people of Vietnam have the right to enjoy freedom and independence, and have become free and independent. Tears mixed with jubilation. The revolution had found not just its leader, but its soul. The French, however, would not relinquish their prize so easily. The struggle that followed, the First Indochina War, was not just a clash of arms, but of visions. Liberty versus subjugation, the right to self-determination against the machinery of colonial greed. For every gain, the Viet Minh paid in kind: starvation, betrayal, pogroms. Yet with each loss, their resolve only sharpened. Steel tempered in the fires their enemies kindled. In the long years between declaration and recognition, Ho Chi Minh's leadership was manifest less in grand gestures and more in his infinite willingness to endure alongside his people. He taught them that the freedom they chased was not an abstract, unreachable thing, but the slow accumulation of sacrifice and solidarity, grief and endurance. Thus, the old order was slowly shattered, its chains rusting and breaking beneath the weight of 1,000 small acts of defiance. The road to Hanoi, cleaved through jungle and blood, was now a river swelling with the dreams and sorrows of its people. The journey was unfinished, its hardest trials still to come, but at its heart was the fire of a revolution that could not be extinguished. Chapter 5. Roads Paved in Blood and Hope. Every revolution finds its crucible, and Vietnam's was surely here. In mud-spattered villages, in the sickly green of jungle camps, in the silent courage of 1,000 nameless faces. For Ho Chi Minh and the men and women around him, the road ahead would be paved not only with ideals, but with sacrifices so dear that hope itself sometimes faltered beneath the weight. The war with France was not a neat campaign of armies, but an endless struggle, part shadow war, part public insurrection. The enemy was everywhere, in fortified colonial compounds, in the foreign planes droning overhead, and sometimes, heartbreakingly, in neighbors forced into terrible choices by hunger or coercion. Villages were razed, crops burned, lines drawn in the dirt, only to blur beneath the monsoon's relentless rain. Still, nowhere did hope burn more fiercely than in the shared resolve of the people. The Viet Minh became not just a fighting force, but as simple village committees deliberated by torchlight. Guerrilla bands melted into rice paddies by day and struck from bamboo by night. Families took in wounded fighters as though they were kin. The spirit of resistance, once flickering, now blazed through every hardship. For Ho Chi Minh, the burden of command weighed heavily. Though revered as the Uncle Ho, who ate simple meals and mended his clothes, the loneliness of leadership was profound. He wrote endless letters to comfort grieving mothers, every word uttered in public matched by a night's worth of private tears. The revolution's victories and defeats pressed upon him. Every lost life was a wound he carried forward. It is tempting, in the afterglow of victory, to forget the cost. But beneath each triumph, victories in the Red River Delta, the capture of colonial outposts, the slow swing of diplomatic momentum, lay stories of loss too numerous to count. Mothers who sent all their sons to war and watched none return. Ancient villages that vanished entirely, their names remembered only on scraps of paper, buried deep in the archives of memory. And yet, amidst the devastation grew seeds of hope. The revolution was as much about the future as it was about righting old wrongs. Literacy campaigns swept through liberated areas. Land reforms, though deeply flawed and sometimes tragic, offered a vision of justice unthinkable under colonial rule. The youth, entrusted with arms and ideals, embraced the idea that tomorrow might be won, not just with bullets, but with books. These years, grim and glorious both, were a test of resilience, physical, moral, and spiritual. The road to Hanoi was now no longer traveled by a lone dreamer, but by millions moving in trembling, uncertain unity. They carried with them stories more powerful than any gun, of a nation's right to exist, to be free, to heal. The riverside whispers at sundown, the laughter of children darting between shelters, mingled with the distant rumble of artillery, reminding all who survived freedom is never an inheritance, but a task to be renewed, again and again. Ho Chi Minh watched as his people bled, persevered, and somehow, against all odds, kept loving the land that gave them birth. The old man's heart broke anew each morning as news of suffering reached his tent, but it also filled with pride at evidence that the Vietnamese soul was unbreakable. Even in carnage, there ran an undercurrent of tenderness, a hope, fierce as the Red River at flood, that the dawn would come dark as the war ground on. The path to peace seemed distant, yet not unreachable. With every mile recaptured, every life reclaimed from the brink, the vision came into sharper focus. A Vietnam reunited, reborn from the agony of its own making. Chapter 6. From Jungle Shadows to City Lights. The air in the jungle is thick and restless, scented with dew, mud, and longing. It is the breath of resistance, drawn by men and women who have grown used to the camouflage of leaves above, roots below, and the constant need for silence between. Ho Chi Minh's life in these years unfurled in the skyscraping green of Vietnam's living heart, the jungles that veiled the movements of soldiers, children, and revolutionaries alike. Each step through the undergrowth was a risk. Each nightfall meant both shelter and the threat of sudden death. Yet, in this place of shadows, strategies blossomed, and the fragile seed of hope pressed upward, seeking the light. The jungle was bare city. Branches lent themselves to secret meetings. Fallen logs became desks, pages strewn with plans and impassioned pleas for unity. Through whispers and gestures, dreams passed from hand-to-hand freedom, dignity, a home reclaimed. There grew a brotherhood here, knitted together by necessity as much as by conviction. It was not just Ho Chi Minh at the heart, though he was the axis around which so much turned, but the collective heartbeat of a people in hiding, learning not only to survive, but to resist. The years in the jungle were not marked by dates, but by seasons of hardship and inspiration. Monsoons that made rivers out of paths, dry spells that cracked the earth and the skin. Hunger gnawed at resolve, and so did doubt. Yet somehow, each trial drew the circle of solidarity tighter. After a night heavy with shellfire, Ho Chi Minh would wake in the pale dawn and write words meant not just to rally, but to comfort. Our struggle is the righteous struggle of the oppressed. The day will come when we walk upright in the light. The light always just past the next bend in the river, just beyond the distant tree line, became a kind of vision. For years, the city lights of Hanoi seemed impossibly far away, as if belonging to another world. Yet even in the jungles, shadows, there was memory, a city whispered about at firesides, remembered in the lullabies sung to children huddled beneath lean-tos, promising a tomorrow no one could yet see. As the years stretched on, the jungle forged a new kind of leader. In Ho Chi Minh, gentle in counsel, but steely when necessary. He listened more than he spoke, drawing out the wisdom in others. He saw those who faltered, and instead of shaming, found ways to rekindle their courage. Victory is not achieved alone, he would remind his comrades. It is a path walked in unison. But victories, when they came, were bought at a fearful price. The French, stubborn in their colonial myopia, sent ever more troops, and with them more terror. Yet even as the streams ran muddied with loss, there were always moments snatched. Laughter, a song sung softly under the moon, the chance to teach a child to read with a scrap of paper and stub of charcoal. These were the real battlegrounds, and the victories here were the ones that made survival possible. In the dying days of occupation, word reached the jungle that the city Hanoi was ready to rise. The call was not for open battle, but for a coordinated surge of will and presence. With his characteristic humility, Ho Chi Minh did not lead the first charge steps into the city. Instead, he encouraged trusted comrades to be the vanguard. The resistance flowed like a delta from the shadows into the city lights, moving in silence, astonishing the world by reappearing, seemingly overnight, where they were least expected. Entry into Hanoi was not a single event, but a series of homecomings. For every figure slipping from the jungle, a mother was waiting, a brother, a child grown taller than last remembered. They filtered back by alleyways and back roads, carrying with them stories and scars. Ho Chi Minh himself entered not in fanfare, but quietly, an old man simply walking into a city awash with tears and joy. The city responded in kind. Lights that had flickered uncertainly in the blackout years now burned steadily, casting halos over streets crowded with reunions. The people of Hanoi, worn thin by suspicion and deprivation, emerged from their shadows and embraced the returned. They listened to the stories. They wept at the faces made old before their time. They began the slow, alchemical work of rebuilding. Trust not just in leaders, but in one another. It was a fragile dawn, yet unmistakably a dawn. Children ran in the streets where silence once reigned. The Red River glinted with the promise of morning. In the heart of the city, Ho Chi Minh paused, his hand resting for a moment on a battered flag. He bowed his head, remembering the jungle, shadows that had led to these city lights. But peace was never simple, nor guaranteed. The city itself seemed to know this, as if bracing for the next breath. For now, there was a light, strange, golden, and precious. It was enough for all to gather around, warmed not only by hope, but by the memory of how dearly it had been won. Chapter 7. Peace at Edge's End. Peace, when it arrived, was not the triumphant exhalation the world had imagined for Vietnam. It came cautiously, awkwardly, tiptoeing over the jagged edges left by years of suffering. For Ho Chi Minh, peace was not a full stop, but an uneasy ellipsis, a question suspended in the humid air of Hanoi. In the public squares and hushed tea houses of the city, people spoke of peace as if handling a fragile relics, something that might shatter if observed too closely. The wounds of war, raw and unstitched, throbbed beneath every conversation. Fathers came home to sons they barely recognized. Mothers counted the gaps at crowded tables. The laughter of children returned to schools in their ill-fitting uniforms was sweet and strange, as if the world itself had to relearn the sound of joy. Ho Chi Minh faced the burden of leadership in peacetime with a kind of mournful determination. He read letters from widows and war veterans, from orphans and anxious farmers. Their words reverberated in him. The war had ended, but grief did not respect the treaties signed, nor the calendars turned. Grief found new ways to haunt the living. Loss had become the new language of the streets. The international world, meanwhile, peered at Vietnam's peace with wary intrigue. Foreign powers waited, watching for a misstep, for signs of collapse or chaos. Aid arrived with conditions attached, weighed down by expectations that the Vietnamese remake themselves in some foreign image. Ho Chi Minh, always the tactician, responded with a patient, measured diplomacy. He accepted help where it would not cost the country its soul. He refused it where it reeked of new chains. There were those in Hanoi who whispered that peace was just another phase of war, a Cold War of rebuilding, of ideology, of memory and forgetting. With his wise, sorrowful eyes, Ho Chi Minh acknowledged the truth of this. True peace, he said in one of his rare public addresses, means more than the end of fighting. It must heal the hurts, feed the hungry, teach the children, and keep the powerful honest before the weak. So the real work began. Ration books gave way, slowly, to open markets. Fields long abandoned were sown again, the first green rimming the paddies like a fresh hope. A generation of orphans was gathered into schools and houses, taught to read not just books, but faces, gestures, kindness. Veterans limped in silent processions, seeking not just prosthetics, but meaning for the sacrifices they had borne. Some found it, others did not, and slipped away quietly into the night. Yet peace was always at the edges and the precipice. Every small victory was threatened by the ghosts of the past. New conflicts, internal and external, simmered between neighbors, between villages, between memories themselves. In this uneasy dawn, Ho Chi Minh aged before the nation's eyes. He walked the markets not as an icon, but as a comrade sharing. News lending his ear, letting the hopes and sorrows of ordinary people soak into his bones, that the ceremonies of peace were beautiful, but never enough. Parades meant little compared to the daily work of holding families together, of finding respect between rivals, of forgiving or at least enduring old wounds. The peace was built meal by meal, gesture by gesture. Its splendor was in its ordinarieess. In the end, Ho Chi Minh knew Vietnam's peace would always be incomplete. Next to the edge, always threatened by forces seen and unseen. Yet, standing in the hush before sunrise, he once again felt the old hope pulse within him. Peace is not a gift. It is a task, he wrote in his journal. Every day, we must make ourselves worthy of it. That was the challenge etched in every face as the sun rose over Hanoi, cupped carefully in the trembling hands of an old leader, his eyes fixed steadily on the uncertain, glorious edge of tomorrow. Chapter 8. Hanoi's Memory, the World's Reckoning. Time, ever elusive, gathers its treasures in memory. For Hanoi, memory cradles not just the facts of the past, but its living spirit. Here, the stones remember, the trees remember. Each street corner holds an echo. Each doorway contains untold stories woven together as the collective reckoning, not just of a nation, but of the world. As the decades now gather behind her, Hanoi's memory is a mosaic, bright and dark tesserae set edge to edge. Amid the hum of modernity motorbikes, raucous laughter, neon lights, a different song can be heard. It is the music of remembrance, the distant crackle of old radios, the fragrance of lily at a grave, the reverent silence at Ho Chi Minh's mausoleum. For the people of Hanoi, memory is not a passive inheritance, but a choice, a daily act of courage, to gaze unflinching at what was lost and gained. Grandchildren listen at elders' knees. Stories told in trembling voices about hunger, about heroism, about what it means to love a country so fiercely it hurts. They are stories of small miracles, an extra bowl of rice shared, the return of a lost soldier, the forgiveness found in a simple nod across a market stall. But memory is also a mirror, reflecting the world's gaze upon Vietnam and upon itself. The world came to Hanoi with warplanes and embassies. It left scars and trees, but also a kind of kinship or of mutual suffering. Tourists walk the old quarter with cameras and curiosity, but sometimes they pause, overcome by a sense that memory here is sacred, that every stone underfoot whispers, remember. The reckoning is not just Vietnam's, it is the world's. What did the world learn from Hanoi's pain, from Ho Chi Minh's disciplined hope, from the resilience of a people who refused erasure? At times, the answer seems frustratingly faint. Wars rage elsewhere, leaders forget, the old cycle begins anew. Yet, in moments of grace, the world remembers. Sometimes peace is born not of treaties, but of tenacity. Not of might, but of memory. In the twilight of his life, Ho Chi Minh was asked what he hoped for most. He smiled, tired, wise, infinitely kind. Let the world see that a small nation can stand. Let the world learn from our suffering how to love peace, not just in words, but in the quiet of their hearts. Hanoi reckons that it carries the burden and the beauty of its past into every new dawn. The city's pulse is measured not just in revolutions, but in reconciliations, in the delicate daily work of remembrance. It is an act of courage, this remembering. For in the memory of suffering, there is the blueprint for healing. In the memory of resistance, the seed of unity. In the memory of peace so fragile, so hard won the wisdom that all nations, all people, must someday claim for themselves. And as dawn rises over the Red River, gold and infinite, Hanoi remembers. The world, if it listens, will remember too. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button to support the channel, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an audiobook that could change your life now. Let's begin. Enjoy.